If you've seen my top 10 anime from 2014 video, you've probably noticed that I haven't seen that many anime from that year, or at the very least, I missed out on quite a few of them. So I decided to put some effort into watching what I thought most people believed were the best anime of the year. And I also decided to include some popular anime that I watched but didn't put on the list for whatever reason. This list isn't in any particular order, but more like my collective thoughts on some other anime from 2014 that weren't on the end of the year list. I also didn't include any anime from 2014 that I already reviewed. That applies to Tokyo Ghoul, Noragami, Makaku City Actors, and No Game No Life. Links to those reviews will be in the description. If there are any anime that I didn't watch from 2014 that isn't on either list that you'd like to hear my thoughts on, leave it in the comments. With that out of the way, let's get started. The sequel to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure wasn't on my list because I hadn't seen the first anime in the franchise, so with that logic it would have been hard for me to watch this show and understand what was going on. Well, then I watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the 2012 anime, and completely fell in love with it. Naturally, after watching the first season, I'd want to move on to its continuation. And while critically it's slightly worse than JoJo 2012, I still had a freaking blast watching the first season of Stardust Crusaders. Unlike most, I actually really like the episodic nature and seeing new stand users every 2 episodes. And the main characters are just as likable as the characters of 2012. It's also incredibly quotable, the action scenes are well directed and executed, the comedy's hilarious, and the OST is great. Well, it's not as good as Battle Tendency because Taku Iwasaki's pretty hard to beat, but it's still great. The show definitely would have been high on my list if I had seen it, maybe even number 1 or 2, and I recommend that you check it out too. Well, after seeing the first season anyway. The show also wins the award for having the best opening of 2014, no contest. I'm betting that a good portion of you were surprised to see that Nisekoi wasn't on my list, since I stated in my spring 2014 anime review that I really enjoyed it. Well, to put it bluntly, I kind of view Nisekoi to be a confusing topic for me. By all means of logic, I should really dislike this show. It is actually the most cliched thing in existence. Name a romantic comedy cliche, I'll bet that Nisekoi does it in some form. But for whatever reason, I enjoyed every second of it. I guess it's because I find its charm to stem from how it's self-aware of its cliched nature. But there are times where I can't tell whether it's self-aware or just plain cliche, so I can't quite put my finger on why I do enjoy this show so much. Because of that confusion, I felt it necessary to leave it off my list. Since if I can't decide why I like the show, it'd be pretty hard for me to analyze what makes it good and recommend it to other people. Maybe it's a stupid reason, but the entire point of my list was to let people know what, in my opinion, was worth checking out in 2014. And I don't think labeling a show as enjoyable for an indiscernible reason is a good way to recommend an anime to another person. So that's why it didn't appear on the list. I'm going to be perfectly honest here. I think the show is overrated. You know what, internet? Overrated does not equal bad. I don't think that Bahamut is a bad show, but I don't think it's one of the best anime of the fall season like many others do. Actually, I had dropped the show around the midway point because I didn't want to continue it. The only reason I decided to complete it is because everyone said the finale was great, and, well, it was, but that doesn't excuse the dragging middle section of the show. Great animation and well-choreographed action scenes can only get you so far. You also need an engaging plot and characters. And, well, listening to conversations about battle strategy and little else for a good few episodes is incredibly boring to me. I will give the show credit that Favaro and Kaiser's rivalry was always fun to watch, Arima's character was entertaining if not slightly underdeveloped, and Ria's deadpan personality offered a ton of funny dialogue, but the other characters were just there. I also like how Bahamut proves that there is still fantasy action-adventure anime out there that don't rely on fan service, but I'm sorry, the show has a lot of problems that I can't ignore. Still, I'd recommend giving it a shot, and I am looking forward to watching the second season whenever it comes out, but it didn't make my list due to some problems I had with it. Yet again, here's another overrated anime. I'm just gonna wait this one out. Anyway, like with Bahamut, I do appreciate the fact that this proves original anime still exists, and the cinematography is some of the best I've seen in an anime. In fact, the presentation is just plain fantastic. The animation is wonderful, stylized, and Yoko Kanno's OST is god tier. There were some scenes that actually got me emotional because of its execution, mainly the ones between Lisa and 12. And I do think that some of the ideas are very intriguing. However, despite all the good in the show, the bad really taints what could have been a masterpiece. There are tons of scenes that rely on exposition, and while it was entertaining to figure out the cat and mouse situations in the first half, it introduced a lot of characters with no personality or relevance to the story. And then the character 5 shows up. Many people have criticized this character already, so I'm not going to say much more, but she didn't have much of a point. Also, the second half can get pretty ridiculous and confusing, and when you're trying to be a fairly realistic thriller, it's a bad sign when you feature terrorists that don't actually want to kill people but blow up buildings and other public areas. Though I think my main problem with this show is how vague it is. A show has to be able to allow the audience to piece together a puzzle, giving them clues towards what its main ideas are through the story and characters. A show that does this quite well while still being vague is Ergo Proxy. Terror and Resonance, however, doesn't do enough to steer the audience in the right direction, which results in the show feeling pretentious and hollow. And that's what the anime feels like to me. If you want a show with great music and visuals, give it a shot, but that's all that really needs to be said about this show. This anime was just bad. There's really not much else to say about this show besides that. I can see why it became somewhat popular since it's self-aware of its own stupidity and terribleness. But just because an anime is self-aware doesn't mean that the show is good. The animation was hilariously low budget, the characters rather laughable or annoying, the story is beyond preposterous, and the music is good but repetitive. I'll admit, I love over-the-top action shows when they're done correctly, like Kill la Kill and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but this is the bad version of the type of anime I like. It was fun for the first few episodes, but then it got repetitive, boring, and actually began taking itself seriously near the end. Why? By the end of the show, I was begging for it to end, though hopeful that it'll regain the spark it had at the beginning. That did not happen, and so we have the worst anime of 2014. This one's a major meh for me. While I did enjoy watching this show while it was airing, my opinion of Date A Live has changed quite a bit since I first watched it. And, well, I think that if I watched the show now, I would not like it at all. When I was picking out which anime would go on the list, I didn't feel like the sequel deserved to be on my best of the year list, due to some pacing issues and not all that much character development. Granted, it was still hilarious at times and somewhat dramatic, but again, I don't think it's very good. It's one of the shows that I enjoy despite it not being good, and that disqualifies it from the list. Pretty much every end of the year list had this show on it, so naturally I decided to check it out. And this is one of those times where the hype actually matches the show. Ping Pong the Animation is the best sports anime I've ever seen, above Kuroko and Free for being well written, realistic, and incredibly thoughtful. Actually, I hesitate to even call this a sports anime because Ping Pong was ultimately just a platform for the characterization and development of the anime's characters. Speaking of characters, they're all great, representing different aspects of sports and how separate people utilize their talent and dedication. Sometimes characters don't win, either because they're just not cut out for the sport or because they're talented but don't care enough. But they move on from their failures, either to different pursuits or changing their attitudes about their current ambitions. I could go on for hours about how great this show is, but I don't want to ruin the fun for you. Just go watch it. It isn't deigned to be the greatest anime of 2014 for nothing. Here's a controversial one. Oh, I'll Noah Zero, I can only avoid you for so long. After having dropped it around 6 months ago, I decided to watch it until the end since no one would shut up about it, and I wanted to see what the fuss was about. Well, it's yet another overhyped action show along the lines of Sword Art Online, Guilty Crown, and Tokyo Ghoul, but out of all those shows I'd say that I enjoyed Out Noah the most. There were some aspects that I actually liked a lot. For example, Flame was a pretty good character, the scenes dealing with Marito's PTSD were fairly well executed, the well-directed action scenes were entertaining, the OST was godly courtesy of Hiroyuki Sawano, the infamous ending was tragic and shocking, and the growing relationship between the princess and Inaho was pretty sweet. Yeah, I'll admit, the last thing I mentioned could have been much stronger, but what saves it is how Inaho doesn't act like a complete sociopath when interacting with the princess, showing how he's beginning to care about her, and it's actually pretty subtle. I did not expect that from a show like this. But I can't deny that this show has a ton of problems, too many to fit into one short section of a video. I will say that this show can get really stupid at times, to the point where I was facepalming quite a bit or shaking my head, questioning how what was happening was possible. And, well, most of the other characters are incredibly undercharacterized and their development is pretty much non-existent. The character that's the guilty of this would be the main villain. I'll give them credit for at least trying to add depth to his character, but the way they do it makes no sense. And I'm only scratching the surface. But overall, I did find myself liking this series despite its onslaught of issues. It wouldn't have gotten on my list if I'd watched it when it was airing, but it's still a relatively entertaining series if you have too much time on your hands. After watching the first season of Free, I liked it a lot and it did get on my favorites list, but I can't say that I ever truly loved it. When I watched the second season, however, the show completely won me over. I've heard that KyoAni sequels typically improve upon their first seasons, and I'd say that this show makes a strong case for it. The drama has improved, feeling less sporadic, and is actually built up subtly throughout the anime. The way I look at this anime as a whole is Free is about finding out what you love, while Eternal Summer is about deciding what to do with what you love and accepting change. This is what a good sequel should do, continue and expand upon the pre-existing material, not just rehash the prequel. Though the glue that really holds everything together is the character cast. I'll admit that they're not very original characters, but quite frankly, this is one of the most likable groups of characters I've ever seen in any anime. And without them, this show would have just been another pretty KyoAni show. But because I like the characters so much, this show is now high and secure on my favorites, and I hope it'll stay that way. This was a short that gained some popularity in the fall 2014 season, and I can see why. I enjoyed every second of this anime, and I think it's one of the best anime shorts to date. It is heartfelt, relatable, absolutely hilarious, and I think that the relationship between Kaoru and Hajime is one of the best to come out of recent anime. It's certainly refreshing to watch a show about a blossoming relationship instead of watching the build-up to one, and I can't understand really hit the nail over the head concerning its themes about love. I recommend it for someone who's looking for something short and sweet. Before I go, I'd like to mention a little show called Yuki Yuna is a Hero. This was actually going to be on the list, but when I tried to watch it, I ended up not liking it all that much. I currently have this show on hold, and will probably get around to finishing it eventually, but for now I'm not watching it. Other 2014 anime that I plan to watch sometime in the future are Wick Sauce, Space Dandy, Naki no Asakura, and Samurai Flamenco, which didn't make the list because they're all too core and I haven't had time to watch them. Finally, Hunter x Hunter 2011. I left this show out during my listing of anime I hadn't seen, and that's because I wasn't aware that it ended in 2014. Yeah, that was idiotic, but I will definitely watch it soon. Also, if anyone's wondering, here's a list of my top 9 favorite anime from 2014, with Ping Pong as number 1 and Kill la Kill as number 9. Though I do find it kind of hilarious that I found the 3 best 2014 anime after deciding to do this project. Maybe it wasn't so bad a year after all. Well, that's all from me. I'll see you all in my next video. Until then,